I knew something was wrong the second I walked into the lobby, and the receptionist couldn't look me in the eye. Not the polite, busy morning kind of avoidance, more like her gaze had been welded to a vein in the marble. I hadn't even set my briefcase down when my phone buzzed with an Outlook invite. Urgent performance review, 9:15 a.m., Conf R7B. Subject line in all caps, no body, no sender, just a calendar dagger slipped between my ribs. Let me give you context. I just closed 14 straight quarters of growth. 14! 3 weeks earlier, I'd landed the Norwood account, projected $31.6 million over the next 3 years, built from a scribble on a red eye in a week of negotiations that left the other side smiling like they'd won. In finance long enough, you develop a sixth sense for the moment the air changes, a quiet tickle at the base of your neck when the building stops being a workplace and starts being a crime scene. My spine was practically shouting. As I moved down the corridor, I took the long way. Not fear, not hesitation, just information gathering. Who looked away? Who suddenly found an urgent reason to refill water? The analyst I'd mentored for 4 years ducked into the copy room like he'd seen a ghost. That was confirmation. I slipped into my office, locked the door, and opened the bottom drawer I never used. Inside, my original contract, the version with the ink signatures, not the clean PDF HR liked to pretend was the only truth. I flipped straight to Clause 12F, the one I'd renegotiated after Q4 last year, when my value became inconveniently obvious. I read it once, then again. Then I ran my thumb over the initials, mine, my manager's, and the CEO's, each one placed with lazy confidence. Still there. My parachute, my kill switch, my insurance against exactly this kind of amateur hour move. I slid the pages into my leather portfolio, adjusted my jacket, looked at my reflection once, and gave myself the smallest nod. If you're wondering how a routine restructuring turned into the most expensive mistake they ever made in public, keep watching. This only gets tighter from here. When I reached conference room 7B, the blinds were already drawn. Inside sat my manager, Lenora, stiff-backed, and 2 HR reps with the expression of people swallowing nails. No laptops, no printed metrics, no water, no performance discussion. Just a single sheet of paper centered in front of Lenora like a verdict. "Graham," she said, wearing a grimace dressed up as empathy, "thank you for joining on short notice." I didn't sit. She cleared her throat the way people do when they're about to pretend they're the villain. "We're restructuring," she said. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. This decision is final and approved by leadership." Leadership meant the CEO, who couldn't even be bothered to show his face. I took a slow breath. No protest, no bargaining. "Understood," I said. Lenora blinked, surprised, like she'd expected a breakdown. HR slid forward the script. "We'll need your badge." I handed it over with a polite smile. And that's the moment they thought they'd won, because what they didn't understand was they hadn't avoided my payout by firing me 1 day before my incentive vested. They'd triggered it, and Clause 12F didn't just protect my bonus, it punished bad faith. They simply hadn't read what they initialed. I walked out of conference room 7B like I was heading to grab coffee, not like I'd just been erased from the org chart. Calm is unsettling when people expect collapse, and I could feel it trailing me down the hall. Lenora stayed behind, probably already rehearsing the version of events where this was clean. HR didn't escort me. They never do when they think the paperwork is airtight. I passed my office without stopping. They'd box my things later, label them with my name like evidence from a closed case. That's corporate muscle memory. You don't erase people, you archive them. Instead of heading toward the parking elevators, I swiped into the executive lift and hit 42, legal and compliance. I'd spent enough late nights up there during the Norwood deal to know who still remembered that contracts are promises, not decorations. The receptionist glanced up when I set my portfolio on the counter. "Tell Marcus Hale I'm here," I said. She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" I smiled.
I was just terminated. He'll want to see me. Marcus was junior counsel, sharp and quiet, the kind of lawyer who listened more than he spoke. He'd once asked me if staying in-house was a mistake. I told him to stay long enough to learn where the leverage lived. 10 minutes later, his office door closed behind us. "They let you go?" he asked. Effective immediately, no cause, standard severance language. His jaw tightened. Any mention of the incentive? I opened the folder, flipped to the tab, and slid the page across the desk. Clause 12F, paragraph 2. He scanned it once, then again slower. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "This activates on termination within 24 hours of vesting," he said. "Acceleration, multiplier, damages if contested." Correct. They initialed every page? Every one.
The CEO even joked about the extra language. Marcus leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "They thought firing you early would void it. They thought wrong." He nodded, already pulling up internal systems. "If we escalate quietly, this detonates from the inside." "That's the preference," I said. "No theater, just enforcement." He photographed the page, scanned the packet, and emailed it to himself. As I stood to leave, he looked up. "They're going to panic." "They already are," I said. "They just don't know why yet." I stepped back into the hall feeling lighter, not because I'd won, but because the outcome was now inevitable. Calm isn't resignation. Sometimes it's certainty catching up to everyone else. I didn't go to the garage after legal. Not yet. There was one more stop to make while the building still thought I belonged to it. I rode the elevator up to 41, stepped out into the quiet hum of compliance, and walked past rows of glass-walled offices where people pretended not to see me. That's the thing about corporate exits. Once the rumor starts, everyone suddenly believes invisibility is contagious. I spotted Nina Brooks exactly where I expected her, hunched over her monitor in a cubicle that looked too small for the amount of institutional memory she carried. Nina remembered everything: case citations, old policy revisions, the day the company quietly rewrote its ethics language to protect executives instead of employees. She'd started as an intern back when people still thought HR was neutral. 5 years later, she knew better. She looked up, startled. "Read? I just heard—" "You did," I said, placing the folder on her desk. "Clause 12F. Original contract, amendments, signatures, timestamps." She opened it slowly, like it might bite. "You were terminated? Effective immediately, no cause, 23 hours before vesting." Her eyes widened as she read. "This clause, it accelerates everything. And penalizes interference." She flipped pages faster now, absorbing the language. "Lenora signed this implementation memo. Page 5, DocuSign from her tablet, metadata intact." Nina let out a short, stunned laugh. "They thought they were being clever." "They usually do." She paused on the multiplier section, reread it, then looked up at me. "This is surgical." It was written that way. I watched the calculations settle into her posture. "Marcus Hale has a copy," I added. "He's escalating quietly. I wanted redundancy." Nina nodded once. "I'll take this to senior compliance, now." She hesitated. "What if they try to bury it?" "They can't," I said. "There are backups, and an automated trigger if my employment record changes without a matching clause tag." Her mouth opened slightly. "You're serious?" "I don't bluff with paper." I left her there, spine straight, already becoming the kind of person companies regret underestimating. On my way out, I passed the pantry. 2 interns fell silent mid-sentence, eyes wide like they'd seen a ghost. Word travels fast when the wrong person gets cut loose. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the steel and adjusted my collar. They thought they'd buried me. What they'd actually done was pull the pin and hand the grenade to legal, compliance, and the board, each one holding a copy with their initials on it. The building hummed on, unaware it had just become evidence. By the time I stepped out onto the street, the morning had shifted.
Same city, same glass towers, but the air felt thinner, like pressure had dropped without warning. I didn't rush. There was no advantage in speed anymore. The machine had been set in motion, and machines hate being rushed. I walked 2 blocks, crossed with the light, and ducked into a quiet cafe with reliable Wi-Fi and a clear view of the front door. I chose a corner table, ordered black coffee, and opened my laptop. At 10:32 a.m., the first signal hit. Internal calendar alert, forwarded by Nina. Subject: Contractual Exposure Review, Priority 1. Attendees: Legal, Compliance, Compensation. No HR. That exclusion alone told me everything. They weren't debating whether they'd messed up. They were calculating how much it would hurt. I closed the laptop and watched the door instead. Panic has a particular posture. Shoulders forward, phone glued to the ear, pacing in tight circles like gravity itself has become hostile. I spotted Lenora 10 minutes later across the street, storming out of the building with her blazer half-buttoned, already dialing. She didn't see me. People rarely do when they're drowning in consequences. My phone buzzed. Marcus. One-word message. They've realized. I typed back. Good. Inside the building, the scramble had begun. Emails pulled from archive, approval chains reviewed, fingers pointing in widening arcs. Someone in HR was undoubtedly being asked to find documentation, as if performance issues could be retroactively invented. They couldn't. My file was clean. That was the point. Another buzz. Nina again. Compliance flagged retaliation risk. Senior counsel looped in. I took a sip of coffee, still hot. Timing was perfect. Retaliation is the word companies fear most when there's a paper trail. It turns private embarrassment into public liability. At 10:58, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring once before answering. Reed Calder, I said evenly. A pause, then a voice carefully neutral. This is Howard Klein from the board. We're reviewing the circumstances around your departure. Reviewing, not discussing, not clarifying. Understood, I said. All relevant documentation has already been submitted internally. Another pause, longer this time. We'd like to ensure there's no misunderstanding. There isn't, I replied. Clause 12F is explicit. Silence. He cleared his throat. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. I didn't feel triumph, just confirmation. Across the street, Lenora reappeared, phone pressed tight to her ear, face pale now. The building behind her still looked pristine, confident, untouched. That's how these things always start. Structures don't crack loudly. They fail quietly, from the inside, one clause at a time. The call with the board member didn't change my posture, but it changed theirs. I could feel it through the silence that followed. When executives stop talking, it's because they've run out of options and are afraid the next sentence will make it worse. I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and left the cafe without looking back. There was nothing left to monitor from the sidewalk. The rest would happen behind glass and locked doors. By noon, my phone was vibrating every few minutes. Missed calls from internal numbers I suddenly didn't recognize. Messages that said things like, quick clarification, and just want to align. I ignored all of them. Engagement is leverage, and I wasn't ready to spend any. Instead, I drove home, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and opened the encrypted drive I'd built years ago when I stopped trusting single points of failure. 3 copies of my contract sat there, each annotated, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. One local, one cloud, one scheduled to auto-release if my employment record was altered without matching documentation. Paranoia, some people called it. I called it preparation. At 12:47 p.m., Nina messaged again. They're asking HR for cause documentation. There is none. Good. At 1:05, Marcus followed. Senior counsel is advising containment. Board is asking how this got through. Better. Containment means damage is already assumed. Around 1:30, the CEO finally entered the picture. Not directly, of course. He sent his chief of staff to float a feeler, a voicemail, careful and vague. "Reed, this is just a misunderstanding. Let's connect and clear the air." I deleted it without replying. Misunderstandings happen when language is ambiguous. Clause 12F was not. Inside the company, the mood had turned brittle. People were being pulled into rooms without context, calendars wiped, meetings rescheduled under new names that sounded less incriminating, strategic alignment, compensation harmonization, all euphemisms for panic. By mid-afternoon, compliance had escalated the issue to external counsel. That move alone added another zero to the problem. External lawyers don't exist to save feelings. They exist to measure exposure and assign blame. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from an address that didn't use the company domain. Subject: Acknowledgement of receipt. Short: cold. We confirm receipt of your documentation regarding Clause 12F. Review is underway. No apology, no friendliness, just confirmation that the clock was now running on their side. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. This was the quietest part of the process, the eye of it. Everyone assumes revenge is loud. It isn't. It's procedural. It's watching people realize that the rules they ignored are about to enforce themselves, and there's nothing emotional they can do to stop it.
By late afternoon, the internal narrative had shifted from unexpected restructuring to contain the blast radius. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I'd sat through enough post-mortems to recognize the pattern. When senior leadership starts using words like exposure and precedent in the same sentence, someone is already being measured for sacrifice. My phone finally rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected so soon. It was the CEO. I let it ring out. 2 minutes later, an email arrived instead, carefully drafted, no subject line. "Reed, let's talk. I think there's been a misalignment in execution." Misalignment, the corporate equivalent of saying the building fell down because the wind was misunderstood. I didn't reply. At 4:11 p.m., Marcus sent another update. External counsel confirmed enforceability. They're advising payout to avoid escalation. That was the sentence that mattered. Once outside lawyers say avoid escalation, the game is functionally over. The only remaining variables are timing and ego. Nina followed up a few minutes later. HR is panicking. They're trying to reconstruct a performance narrative retroactively. I almost laughed. Retroactive cause is the fastest way to turn a bad decision into a public one. Documentation created after termination doesn't protect a company, it indicts it. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing ordinary things on purpose. Laundry, a long walk, cooking something that took more attention than skill. Normality is grounding when the outcome is no longer in doubt. Around 6, the first real offer came through, delivered by email from external counsel. Not numbers yet, just intent. "We are open to discussing a mutually agreeable resolution." Translation: "Please don't make this visible." I still didn't respond. Silence was doing more work than any counteroffer could. Inside the company, the pressure was consolidating. Lenora was being questioned about process. HR leadership was being asked why legal hadn't been looped in. The CEO was discovering in real time the cost of assuming someone else had read the fine print. That evening, Marcus sent one last message before signing off. "Board call scheduled for first thing tomorrow. This will not be quiet." I set my phone face down and sat there for a moment. Not smiling, not tense, just present. They had fired me to save money. Overnight, they'd learned what it actually costs to ignore the contract you didn't think the other person would ever need to use. The board call happened without me, which was exactly how I wanted it. When decisions start getting made in rooms you're not invited to, it means the facts have outgrown personalities. I woke up early, not out of nerves, but habit. Years of earnings calls do that to you. My phone was quiet until 8:22 a.m. when a single message came through from Marcus. "They're circling." That was all. No emojis, no elaboration. I pictured the room without needing details. The CEO trying to project control, legal walking through timelines with surgical patience, compliance pointing out words like retaliation and bad faith. Someone on the board finally asking how no one caught Clause 12F, someone else realizing they had and ignored it. At 9:03, Nina texted, "Lenora's being asked to explain why termination happened without cause documentation. She's not doing well." I felt no satisfaction in that. Lenora hadn't been the architect, she'd been the instrument. The real failure was structural, and structures don't feel embarrassment. Around mid-morning, an email hit my inbox from external counsel again, longer this time, still polite, still bloodless. Based on our preliminary review, we acknowledge the applicability of Clause 12F. We are prepared to discuss expedited resolution. Prepared, not disputing, not contesting. That word told me everything I needed to know. I waited another hour before replying, just long enough to make it clear I wasn't hovering over my inbox. My response was brief. I'm available to receive written confirmation. No demands, no threats, just a door they could walk through or not. Inside the company, the fault lines were widening. The CFO was recalculating projections that now included my name as a liability line item. HR was being warned not to touch my file without legal sign-off. The CEO was discovering how lonely authority becomes when it's boxed in by signatures he'd treated as formalities. Just before noon, the call I'd expected finally came. A board member I'd met years earlier, voice calm but strained. "Reed, we're trying to resolve this efficiently." "Efficiency depends on clarity," I said. "The contract is clear." A pause. "You understand this has broader implications. So did Clause 12F when it was approved." Silence again. Then, quietly, "We're not disputing your position." That was the admission. After the call ended, I set my phone down and went about my day. The hardest part was over. When institutions accept reality, momentum takes over. All that remains is accounting, of money, of responsibility, of who gets remembered as the one who signed what without reading it closely enough. By early afternoon, the numbers were no longer hypothetical. They were being typed into spreadsheets by people whose bonuses now depended on minimizing them. I wasn't in those rooms, but Marcus forwarded the sanitized version. Finance confirms multiplier applies. Estimated exposure higher than base incentive. Higher was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Clause 12F didn't just accelerate vesting, it recalculated value based on current market benchmarks and added a penalty for termination without cause inside the protected window. It was designed to hurt just enough that no one would ever try it twice. At 1:37 p.m., external counsel sent another email. This one had an attachment. Not the agreement yet, a summary. Bullet points. Clean formatting. Estimated payout north of $6 million once equity was repriced. No mention of damages, which told me they were still hoping I wouldn't press. I didn't open it. Reading it wouldn't change the outcome. Around the same time, Nina sent a short update. "Board is furious, not at you." That tracked. Boards don't get angry at contracts. They get angry at the people who pretend contracts don't apply to them. Somewhere in that building, the CEO was realizing that his authority stopped exactly where his initials began. Mid-afternoon, I finally received the call I'd been waiting for. Not from legal, not from HR, from a board member with real influence. His tone was measured, almost respectful. "Reed, this is an unfortunate situation." "It's a documented one," I replied. He sighed softly. "You're aware this will force internal changes." "So did the termination," I said. "Only this way, they're warranted." Another pause. "If we move forward with full payment, will you agree to confidentiality?" "That depends on the terms," I said. "I haven't seen them." He acknowledged that and didn't push. That told me everything. They weren't negotiating leverage, they were negotiating optics.
After the call, I sat quietly for a while, not because I was weighing options, but because there was nothing left to do. The mechanism was engaged, compliance had logged it, external counsel had validated it, finance had priced it, the board had accepted it. All that remained was execution. I checked my calendar. Empty. For the first time in years, there was no meeting to prepare for, no deck to polish, no narrative to manage. The absence felt strange, but not uncomfortable. When your leverage is written in ink and backed by timestamps, patience stops being a virtue and becomes a strategy. The agreement arrived just after sunset, when decisions stop pretending to be collaborative and start becoming final. It came from an external firm. Subject line neutral, language precise, no emotional padding, settlement, payment schedule, confidentiality terms, a clean document designed to close a problem, not discuss it. I read it once, slowly. The number was there, higher than the early estimates, adjusted for equity repricing in the contractual multiplier they'd hoped I wouldn't notice. No admission of wrongdoing, of course. There never is. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the math worked the way I said it would. I didn't sign it that night. Not out of spite. Out of discipline. I forwarded it to my own counsel, the one I'd retained years earlier when Clause 12F was still theoretical. He replied within the hour. They know they're boxed in. That was all he needed to say. Inside the company, the fallout was accelerating. Marcus sent a final internal update before going silent. Leadership restructuring underway. Lenora is out. CEO reassigned pending review. Reassigned. The softest word for exile corporate language has ever invented. Nina followed with one last message. They're scrubbing records. Too late. I closed the thread. The next morning, I signed. Not ceremoniously, not with satisfaction, just a pen on paper, initials where required, the same calm precision that had carried me through every other deal that mattered. The wire confirmation landed before noon, a number that would change the rest of my life, sitting in my account without fanfare. No applause, no announcement, just wait. That afternoon, I took a long walk through the city. No phone calls, no emails. People passed me without knowing they were walking by the aftermath of a decision made in a conference room by people who thought timing could outsmart contracts. I felt nothing sharp, just clarity, the kind that settles when a system finishes proving what it's worth. Somewhere behind me, a company was rewriting policies, issuing internal memos, and pretending this had been unavoidable. In truth, it had been inevitable.
All they'd done was choose the most expensive way to learn it. The quiet afterward was the part no one talks about. Once the money clears and the emails stop, there's a strange vacuum where urgency used to live. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and watched the city lights come on, one by one, like a system rebooting without me in it. Over the next few weeks, the ripples reached the surface. The company announced a strategic leadership realignment. No names, no explanations. People who knew how to read between lines understood exactly what that meant. Lenora resurfaced at a smaller firm with a shorter title. The CEO vanished into an advisory role that sounded important and went nowhere. Internally, Clause 12F became a legend, the one no one laughed at anymore. I received a few quiet messages from former colleagues, not congratulations, gratitude, for proving that the rules still mattered if you bothered to write them carefully enough. I replied to none of them, not out of bitterness, but because the story was already complete. A month later, I took a meeting with a private investment group. No formal offer, just a conversation. They didn't ask about my resume. They asked how I'd structured protection when power shifted against me. They wanted judgment, not output. That was the difference. As I left the meeting, I realized something had changed permanently. I no longer needed to be indispensable inside someone else's structure. I could choose where to apply pressure or whether to apply it at all.
On my way home, I passed the old building once, by accident. Same glass, same logo, same confidence. It looked smaller now, not weaker, just exposed. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt finished. They had built an institution assuming compliance was the same as loyalty. I had built a clause assuming the opposite. In the end, nothing dramatic happened. No lawsuits, no headlines, just a contract doing exactly what it was designed to do, and a company learning, quietly, expensively, that preparation always outlasts authority.